This is Embrace Zoe, the podcast that celebrates struggles turned into strength. Truth is, life's uphill battle will either make you or break you. After every episode, I pray you're empowered knowing you have the spark that it takes to rise up in the dark and truly understand the power of light. I'm Michelle Salinas. Join me as we dive into a story about revival through adoption. Catherine, once an orphaned, unwanted newborn child, explains how a dream led to her redemption story. My invitation to hearing this story is opening hearts and minds to seeing the power and the essence of being vulnerable, understanding that it's not this happened to me, but is this was an opportunity for me, and understanding what it sounds like and what it feels like when there's so much redemption in places where we might have endured pain or questions. And I love that in every story, we always have this moment where we say, but why? I'm a good person, but why? And then we get to these stories like yours, where the testimonial is so powerful that the why doesn't matter. It's the how and the where and how the journey has transitioned you. So for the audience to know more about who you are, just dive into a little bit of everything that comprises who Catherine is.
A pastor, a mom, a wife, a friend. And I'm truly, honestly grateful to be alive. I'm grateful that God always has a purpose and a plan. My story is that at birth, I was given away. I was a very sick baby, and I was given away to an orphanage.
Mm.
So when I think of my life, I sit here today and I'm like, you know what, God? I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful to have life. Like I came very close to not being alive. I came very close to not, being able to live out my purpose just because I was an unwanted baby, handed over, just given over. And, I was contemplating on this today. And I'm just going to share this scripture with you. This is from Psalms 139. And it says this, Michelle. It says, God, you made all the delicate inner parts of my body, and you knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. I mean, aren't we all just wonderfully complex, right? Your workmanship is marvelous, and how well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion. And as I was woven together in the dark of the womb, you saw me before I was born.
Mm.
Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. I'm grateful to be alive. And for all of us, God knew us before we ever took a breath.
Mm.
God knew us. He formed us just so perfectly in our mother's womb, as is happening to your child right now. Like He formed us, He made us before, it says before we ever took a breath. He knew us.
Isn't that chilling in like a very profound way? It makes you feel so valuable, but at the same time, like it's an overwhelming type of love.
Truly, truly, it is. It
Because then, the person that does hear this story and says, "Well, I don't know God like that." It is an invitation to get to know him, because in the outside looking in, your story is that of, wow, trials, and how did you get past this, and how did you get to even look at you for as being enough already, because on paper it looked like child that was sick given away to an orphanage. And so then somebody really quickly could say, how and why would that be part of your story if he knew you from your mother's womb? And that's the part though that we miss. It's that in those moments of maybe deep pain, struggle, confusion, you found a strength that no other story would have given you had you been, raised up in a prominent, wealthy family, et cetera, et cetera. But none of that matters because your story is powerful exactly how it is. So, what have you learned about when you were given away? Like you were literally like out the womb and into the orphanage. My goodness.
I was.
And how, like, what do you remember? At what age were you adopted?
I was given away to the orphanage right from when I was born. So obviously, I don't remember that part. But I ultimately was adopted by an American family. I was born in Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, Mexico. This lady that adopted me, her name was Susan, she would volunteer at the orphanage that I was given to. And so she would go and she would volunteer and she would serve there. And when the newborn baby got there, she decided, you know what, I want to adopt that baby. So she lived in the United States, but would cross over to Mexico and serve at the orphanage and help. And so she went back. She started doing the paperwork. Her and my father, they started doing the paperwork. It took months at that time, but they were able to legally adopt me. And as I grew up, my mom never failed to tell me that I was adopted. She always, and from the time I can remember, she would tell me that I was adopted. She couldn't hide it because I was the Mexican baby. And my family, well, they were all white, blonde hair, blue eyes. So she thought it best to just tell me from like, oh, there's no hiding this, the child was adopted, right? So she always told me that I was adopted, but she would always tell me this. She would say, Catherine, all the other moms got whatever baby they got, but I got to choose the baby that I wanted. And I wanted you. Of all the babies in the world, I wanted you.
Oh my
And
gosh, you're gonna make me cry.
that instilled in me not typically what a lot of children feel when they're the different ones of their family. It instilled in me a security that she chose me of all the babies in the world. I was the one that she wanted. And I was like, oh, I felt very secure in her love for me. But something very interesting would always happen. Michelle, I grew up having a reoccurring dream. I started having the same dream when I was a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have this dream about meeting a lady that was behind a white screen door. Like, those metal doors in Mexico there or in different countries. We don't have them so much here in America anymore, but it's like a metal screen door and then it has like the swirl designs of metal.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I would have a dream that I was meeting a lady behind a metal screen door. And I started having that dream very young. I had it throughout my teenage years, throughout growing up as an adult, even maybe every other year, some years a little bit more often. But I would have a recurring dream. Well, it so happened that when I was in my mid-30s, I came to a very difficult season in my life. Here I am doing ministry with my husband. We didn't have any children, and I was contemplating, should I have a career change? What am I doing with my life? That maybe it was even a little bit of a midlife crisis or something, but I was just asking all these questions, within me. And I was going through a difficult season. My husband and I, Eliud, we had been married for about 18 years. And, we had been traveling the world. We lived in Southeast Asia. We were ministering and in a lot of different countries and doing a lot of different things. And so, I was just like, okay, what am I doing with my life? And I remember one night just being on my face and asking God, am I spending my life right? What am I doing? can I tell you that it's in those difficult seasons that God begins to work. And it's in those difficult places that when we surrender to Him truly, it's when He can step in and intervene the best, right? And so I was at that place, and I just remember being on my face, just crying, like, God, what am I doing with my life? Like, show me something. And that night, as I laid there, I felt in my heart like Jesus said to me, you know what? Ask me. Ask me something that only matters to you. I'm going to answer you.
Ooh.
I was like, oh, okay, well, you know, for the longest time, I had been thinking, I want to know my biological family. I want to know my heritage. I want to know where I came from. Not because I was dissatisfied with my parents or my mom. I was secure, but I just wanted to know where did I come from? Like, who are these, you know, how did this happen? And so that night, as I felt like Jesus said to me, ask me something that only matters to you, I'm going to answer you. That night, I asked him, Jesus, I want to know my biological family. And as soon as I said that, I had peace. I had peace. I went to bed. I forgot my struggle. I went to bed. The next morning, I got up and I called my mom and I said, hey, Mom. I said, Mom, I'm gonna go look for my biological family. And she said, oh, that's great. She said, I want you to go to the closet in your bedroom and you have your baby book. And she said, I just want you to look through there. You've probably never even noticed it before. She said, but I want you to go to your baby book. And there's a letter that I wrote, and it's in your baby book. And the top of it says, you're 2 weeks old. She said, just look for that. I read the letter. And in the letter, she says, I'm so grateful that you are my baby.
Mm.
I'm so grateful. You're 2 weeks old, and I look at you, and I'm just so grateful that God brought you to me and to this family. And then at the end of the letter, she says, I know that someday you will go back and you will tell your mom and your family how good that Jesus has been to you in your life.
Stop it.
She wrote that when I was 2 weeks old. And in that instance, I knew that I was going to find my family. And so I had very little information for my adoption papers. I had my biological mother's name and her date of birth, and an address that didn't exist any longer. So I found out. But I called my assistant and I told him what was going on. I'm going to find my biological mom, and this is all I have, but I can't call Mexico or do anything because my Spanish, I grew up in a white girl home. My Spanish wasn't so good. So he was like, yeah, he said, give me some time and I'll work on it. Michelle, 3 days later, Vern calls and he says, are you sitting down?
Oh my gosh.
And he said, and I just started looking through kind of at the time, the yellow pages in Mexico online. And he said, and I found a phone number that matched your biological mother's name.
Oh my God.
Thelma Rivas. And so he said, I just started calling. I just started calling all the Thelma Rivases that I could find in Mexico. And he said, and the lady that answered the phone, she said, who's calling? Why do you want to talk to this Thelma Rivas? And so he said, well, I'm calling for my pastor. And he said, she is looking for her family. And the lady on the other side of the phone was my eldest sister. So they put Mama Thelma on the phone, and she said, yes, I'm who she's looking for. I had that first phone conversation with her that day at 5 o'clock. And in fact, 2 days later, Elliot and I got in the car and we drove straight to Ciudad Juarez, to
Oh
Mexico.
my goodness.
And
What are you thinking? Like, I can't even fathom. Like, I'm doing this with my fingers because I feel like I almost want to touch the moment. Like, it feels explosive for me, and I'm not you. What did it feel like for you?
I was kind of in shock. I was in awe because God said, ask me anything that only matters to you, and I'm going to answer you. And so I knew it was a God moment in my life. I knew God was showing me, you have not wasted your life. I have a purpose and I have a plan. From before you were born, I knew you. I knit you together in her womb. And I have a plan for your life. And so it's just always becoming so real to me. So, the address that she gave us to find her she was like, it's not even really an address, just get a cab and tell him to take you to the sign on the mountain. There's a big sign on the mountain. And she said, and I'm in the neighborhood under the sign on the mountain. And then she said, and there's like a street name that if you get a cab driver that's familiar with the area, he might be able to know where that street is. So that's what we did. We got a cab and we said, take us to the mountain, take us to this street. And so we were driving around for like an hour, and we drove down this one street, and I saw this little purple house with a white screen door
Stop.
that I had seen all of my life in my dreams. And I said, wait, stop. That's the house. And, Elliot was like, what? How do you know? And I said, I know. That's the house. I've seen that screen door all my life in my dreams. Pull over. I'm getting out.
Oh my goodness.
So the cab driver stopped. We pulled over. I got out, and sure enough, she walks out with my sister, the cutest little purple house on the side of the mountain, and the most adorable tiny little lady. I'm only 4 feet 11 and 3/4, and she's about the same. The cutest tiny little lady. And she was expecting us. We embraced for the first time. And Michelle, she said, the first words she said to me, she said, I didn't give you away because I wanted to. She said, I made a decision of love so that you could have a better life.
Mm.
So it was being reinforced in my heart that God had a plan for me. And I always wondered growing up, how is it that, like, he just kind of picked me up, took me out of a situation and put me over here. And, how did this happen? And now I'm meeting her for the first time. A precious little lady comes to, I come to find out that I had 4 sisters and 1 brother from her. She later on explained to me that the reason that she gave me up for adoption was because her husband had passed away. She had my siblings, and she had met a man and who was my biological father. But when she was 5 months pregnant with me, he was very bad to her and her children, and was a drunk and just treated them badly. And she knew she had to get away, so she didn't want him to have me or have anything to do with me. So she felt like I have no option but to give this child away. And so she gave me to the orphanage. And instantly there was just this bond between us, a beautiful, beautiful bond of love. And from that moment on, we just developed a strong relationship. And every couple of months I would go back and just get to know my family. And we had the opportunity to help fix our house and, just do so many things. And immediately, I started asking because I also wanted to know whatever happened to my biological dad. And
Mm.
she shut down. She was like, no. Mm-mm. Like, I never looked back. I never had anything ever to do with him. He was not a good man. And she just refused to like even consider, me finding him.
Wow.
So that first year, you know, um, I had gone back to the orphanage that I was adopted from, and got to meet the people at the orphanage, who my mom that raised me still knew them. It was the same directors that were there, so they hadn't seen each other for years and years and years. So I had the opportunity to go back with my mom and dad that had adopted me and take them to meet Mama Thelma and take them to the orphanage and just have that just really precious reunion with all of that happening, which was great. But that was just still this thing in my heart of, I wanted to know my biological dad. So I kept pressing the issue with Mama Thelma. I got to know my siblings, and they just embraced me and loved me, but I wanted to know. So, it took me a year, Michelle, but I finally convinced her. So one day she calls me and she said, "Hey, I've located your dad and he wants to meet you."
Oh
And
my
I was
gosh.
like, "Tell me what happened." And she said, "Well, I found a friend who still had contact with him, and he owns a little taqueria, a little taco stand at the market next to the bridge." And so she said, "I just took the bus and I went over there. And there was a lady there. And there was only her there." And so she said, "I went up and I said, I'm looking for Ruben." And and the lady said, "Well, who are you and what do you want?" And she said, "Well, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm looking for Ruben. He has a daughter that is looking for him." And the lady stopped and she said, "The only reason I'm telling you this, you can come back in an hour and he'll be here." She said, "But the only reason I'm telling you this is for 3 months, he's been having a dream that a little girl is looking for him.
Oh my gosh.
And he keeps talking about it." And so Mama Thelma went back to the taco stand an hour later and they spoke, and she told him that she had given me away to the orphanage. She had a baby. He always thought that maybe she was pregnant, but he didn't know for sure. There I was back in the car,
Back.
driving back to meet Papa Reuben. And this is amazing because God is so redemptive. He stood before me that day and he said, "I need to ask you to forgive me." He said, "Everything that happened to you," he said, "it was my fault." He said, "But I want you to know 15 years ago, I gave my heart to Jesus and God has turned my life around." He
Mm.
said, he said, "The way I was is not who I am." And he stood before me and asked me for forgiveness and went to Mama Thelma and asked for forgiveness. And there was such um, a moment of reconciliation that brought so much healing to the two of them and their lives. But for me to sit there and for the first time in my life, be able to look in the eyes of a mother and a father, and I looked like both of them. And just that moment of God reminding me, I've had a plan. I've had a plan. I am the one that picked you up and did this, and I moved you and I orchestrated your life. I've had a plan. And I always wondered, even as a child, like, why would he do that? Like, why would my mom get to pick me of all the babies? Like, I always wondered, like, what's the big plan? Like, what am I going to do? And so a couple months later, Michelle, I go back
Oh
to a
my
little
gosh.
party that's happening at my biological dad's house. Um, Come to find out, that my biological dad had two daughters and two sons. So I had two half brothers and two half sisters from his side. And they embraced me. They were so happy to meet me. And I got to meet them at this little party that he had. Come to find out that my half sister just so happened to work at the same orphanage that I was adopted from.
Okay.
They were on complete opposite sides of the city. This is a massive city. And I don't know how, but she got a job at the orphanage that I was adopted from.
Out of all the opportunities of employment, it was at that place. This is where I cannot believe, and this is my bias, but I'm plugging in my bias. This is where I just don't believe in luck or coincidence. It is a beautiful story for a reason. There is absolutely a creator at the top that is made these plans. Okay, I am so invested. Keep going. I know.
Back to this scripture that I read at the beginning. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. That is God for all of us. It's just a little bit more pronounced in my life because the just so happened just kept happening. You know, the dream, the door, the dream that Papa Reuben had this little girl's looking for him and kept telling his wife, I keep having this dream, this little girl, like the just so happened just kept happening. Well, she just so happened to work at that orphanage. So I'm at the party and there's these, we're eating tacos and hanging out and there's this little boy and this little girl there. And the little girl looks so much like me. And, she had these little bangs. And I remember seeing a picture when I was her age, having the same bangs and the little bob haircut. We just look so much alike. So I'm thinking this little girl and this little boy must be part of this, my family from Papa Reuben's side, because I just had this connection with them, right? So the party's over at the end of the night and everybody's leaving and the little boy and the little girl are there still. So I asked my half sister, I said, how are these kids related to us? Oh, no, they're not related to us. She said, I work at the orphanage. They're friends of my son. And so I just brought them to the party. And I was like, oh, okay. Wow, I just thought for sure we were related. I just had this connection and I looked just like that little girl. She looks just like me too. So I ended up leaving Mexico the next day, coming back to South Texas, telling my husband, I need to talk to you.
Oof.
And I got back and I told him, I think that I met the two kids that we're supposed to adopt. And he's like, you're crazy. You're crazy. And for a long time we had not had kids, not because we couldn't. We just, we're busy doing ministry, traveling the world, doing all these different things. And we had often said, you know what, maybe someday we'll adopt, but we always thought we were going to adopt kids from India. I don't know why we thought that, but we did. But in this moment, I met these two kids and I had this connection and I told him, I think we're supposed to adopt these kids. And so he was like, whatever, okay, I'll think about it. 3 days later, he calls me, he's at work and he calls me and he was like, hey, I've been praying about that picture you sent me. And he said, I think you may be right.
Oh, gosh.
So we started making the phone calls. Are these two kids eligible for adoption? We called the orphanage. We were friends now with the people there, and they trusted us. They knew us, and they were like, in fact, they are eligible.
Wow.
So we went back. We started developing a relationship with this little boy named Juan and this little girl named Elizabeth. So we would go back every couple of months and just hang out with them. And finally, we sat down and we told them, hey guys, we're going to be here for a couple of days, but we want to know if you guys would like to consider us adopting each other. And so we're going to give you some time to think about it, and we're going to think about it. In a couple of days, we're going to come back and we're all going to vote. And if we all vote yes, then we'll start the process. And if somebody's not ready, then we'll wait. So we hung out. We were there for a couple of days, and then the moment came, we went to the park and we sat down with them. I said, well, it's time to vote. Who votes that we want to adopt each other and become a family? And we all voted yes.
Oh.
And so the process started 1 year, 10 months, and 16 days later.
Wow.
The process was complete through supernatural circumstances. And we crossed the border as the Garcia family from all three of us, me and Juan and Elizabeth, all coming from the same orphanage.
It's just too much.
And I always thought that God picking me up and doing this was about me. Like, what did he have? What was the plan? And in that experience of crossing the bridge and becoming the Garcia family, suddenly I had the realization that, in fact, God's plan was with this little boy named Juan and this little girl named Elizabeth. Way back, all those years ago, when he picked me up to do this, his plan was with them in mind.
Mm,
And they weren't even born yet.
that's just
Before a day of my life was recorded, you knew my life and in their life. He had them in mind.
mhm. I've always said that no blessing is only stopping at you, meaning like, we would be very foolish to believe and egocentric to believe that he just goes to flood in for the purpose of its ending at you. He is such an abundant multiplier that there is no way you can't just stop the goodness at just like, oh, it was a blessing for you. So whether you started a business or you adopted children and whatever the circumstance may be, there is always this legacy building system, of continuing the blessing. Like the blessing did not just stop there. Now you not only have this redemptive story that we've talked about, you have a healing story. You have a story where love is packed, but the bigger of the stories is how his love is so profound. It like hugged you in your circumstance. It hugged them in their circumstance. And now both of them are extremely flourishing human beings. It is wild the level of peace that one can get to enjoy from that level of surrendering. Had you maybe victimized yourself, not to say that you are not entitled to feeling deep, big feelings regarding your story, like those moments when you said, why? And I look different than my family. And that identity crisis when we become teens into women, if of like, I don't really know truly where I come from. Like you said, yet time did what it needed to do. You weren't 13 when you demanded that you know your bio family. You weren't 18 or 21 acting out saying, well, I don't know where I come from, so therefore I'm going to create my own path, and this is out of self-destruction because I have this hole that I want to fill. No, no, no. You stayed steady. You followed the course. You remained patient. You surrendered. And it wasn't until 3 decades later of your life. And there is the bigger part of the story that I take from you. I may not have been adopted, but But in a sense, I have had those moments of question where I say, how long is this going to take? And we get so anxious. And your story is so beautiful to me and inspires me that it's not how long it's going to take, is that the journey through it you have to enjoy, because you would have missed all these beautiful moments of like just cuz, right? Like just had to happen, these dreams and these moments of a beautiful story.
I may not have ever had the opportunity to encounter this if I wasn't at a very hard place in my life where I was panicking. God, what am I doing with my life? It was a hard place that I was at when Jesus said to me, ask me. And I think sometimes, you know, those hard seasons is where, God is just waiting for us to get to the end of ourselves to say, hey, help me out here, like he's waiting for us. He's waiting for us, to just come to that place to say, okay, God, we've just had to get to the end of ourselves sometimes.
Here are my takeaways. Bumps on the road may be what propels us into our destiny. Our lowest points could be the start of a new path with renewed momentum and strength. May this serve as a reminder that you have the spark you need to be the light in your story. Be encouraged, and as the name says, embrace Zoe.